The eastern sun bathed the undeveloped acreage in golden light as I stood on the hill overlooking what would soon become my home. 5 acres of pristine countryside that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather had purchased this land in the 1950s with plans to retire here, but cancer took him before he could build his dream house. The property passed to my father, who always talked about developing it, but never found the time between working double shifts to put me through college. Now it was my turn. After 15 years of saving every possible penny from my modest engineering salary, living in a tiny apartment, driving the same used car since college, and passing up vacations, I had finally accumulated enough money to build a modest home on this family legacy. This land represented not just my future, but a connection to my past. I could almost feel my grandfather standing beside me as I unrolled the architectural plans I had spent months perfecting. The property sat nestled between rolling hills, with a small creek running along the western edge. An old dirt access road wound through a wooded area on the eastern side, connecting to the county road half a mile away. The location was perfect, close enough to town for convenience but far enough away to enjoy the peaceful countryside. Wildlife regularly visited the property. Deer tracks crossed the meadow, and hawks circled overhead hunting for field mice among the tall grasses. I had spent weeks working with an architect who specialized in energy-efficient homes that blended with the natural landscape. The design we created was modest but beautiful, a 2-bedroom home with large windows to capture the stunning views, built partially into the hillside for natural insulation. I planned to install solar panels and a rainwater collection system. This would not be some ostentatious mansion, but a thoughtful tribute to the land itself. The construction company was scheduled to break ground next week. My heart swelled with anticipation every time I visualized waking up to these views, drinking morning coffee on the back deck, watching seasons change across the meadow. After a lifetime of renting, this land represented freedom. That was when I noticed the figures approaching from the tree line. 3 men in pressed button-down shirts and khaki pants walked with purpose across my property. The one in front carried a clipboard. They did not look like the construction crew I had hired, who were not scheduled to arrive until Monday. "Good morning," the lead man called out, his voice friendly but his eyes calculating as he surveyed the land. "I am Douglas Wilkins, president of the Lakeside Hills Homeowners Association. These are my colleagues from the Architectural Review Committee." I blinked in confusion. There must be some mistake. This is private property, not part of any homeowners association. Douglas smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Your property borders our community, which gives us certain concerns about your development plans. We would like to discuss architectural guidelines and considerations that would help your project better align with our community standards." For the next hour, I patiently explained that while I appreciated their input, my property was not subject to their regulations. I showed them my modest, environmentally conscious plans. Hopping transparency would ease their concerns. They nodded politely but left me with a thick packet of suggested guidelines and architectural restrictions that seemed excessive for a simple countryside home. Over the next 2 weeks, their visits became more frequent and less friendly. Douglas and his committee members would appear whenever I was on the property, pointing out potential violations of their code. Though I remained diplomatic, I firmly maintained that their rules did not apply to my independent property. Then came the morning that changed everything. I drove down the dirt access road as usual, coffee thermos in hand, excited to meet with the construction foreman. As I rounded the final bend, I slammed on my brakes so hard my coffee splashed across the dashboard. There, blocking the entire width of my access road, sat a massive, rusted train car. Not a toy or a model. An actual decommissioned railroad car, somehow transported and deliberately positioned to create an immovable barrier between me and my property. My hands trembled as I stepped out of my vehicle. The massive metal structure gleamed dully in the morning light, its rust-red surface stretching completely across my access point. There was no way around it. Steep embankments rose on both sides of the narrow road. A professional-looking sign had been attached to the side. Private property, Lakeside HILLS HOA, no trespassing. The next morning found me at the county records office, surrounded by stacks of property documents, zoning maps, and HOA filings. The clerk, an older woman named Martha with streaks of gray in her dark hair, seemed unusually tense when I explained my situation. She kept glancing toward the supervisor's office as she pulled the requested files. These records show the history of property ownership and zoning changes in that area, she said quietly, sliding a thick folder across the counter. Let me know if you need anything else. Her expression suggested she wanted to say more but thought better of it. As I spread the documents across the reading table, a disturbing pattern emerged. Lakeside Hills had not always been the sprawling development it was now. 23 years ago, it had started as a small cluster of homes on the other side of the hill from my property. Over time, the HOA had systematically expanded, absorbing adjacent properties through various means. One newspaper clipping documented a local farmer's complaints about mysterious property damage followed by lowball purchase offers. Another showed a small house that had been condemned for code violations, shortly after the elderly owner refused to sell to the development. The owner had died before completing his legal challenge, and the property was subsequently purchased by an LLC with connections to the HOA board members. The pattern was undeniable. The Lakeside Hills HOA had been steadily expanding their territory through intimidation, legal maneuvering, and questionable connections with local officials. According to county maps, they had absolutely no legal claim to my access road or any part of my property. Yet they had placed a massive train car as a physical barrier with apparent impunity. My next stop was the county permit office. The clerk there, a nervous young man with darting eyes, could barely meet my gaze when I inquired about permits for placing structures on access roads. You would definitely need multiple permits to place something like that, he confirmed, shuffling papers. Transportation permits, environmental impact studies, structural safety inspections. So can you show me the permits filed for a train car placed on Cedar Creek Road last week? I asked. His eyes widened. Cedar Creek Road, near Lakeside Hills. When I nodded, he glanced around and lowered his voice. Listen, I am not supposed to say this, but you should know that Mr. Wilkins has friends in this building. Very good friends. I left the county offices feeling increasingly frustrated. It seemed no one was willing to challenge the HOA or their tactics. That afternoon, I decided to approach the situation from a different angle. I drove to the Lakeside Hills development itself, parking near the community center. The neighborhood was immaculate, identical mailboxes, perfectly trimmed lawns, and not a garbage can in sight. But there was something sterile about the perfection, something that felt forced rather than natural. I approached an elderly woman tending roses in her front yard. Excuse me, ma'am. My name is Robert. I own property adjacent to Lakeside Hills and am having some trouble with the HOA. Could I ask you a few questions? The woman glanced nervously toward her neighbors' homes before responding. I cannot talk about the board out here, she whispered. Come inside for tea. Once inside her meticulously kept home, Alina Davis told me her story. She had lived in Lakeside Hills for 15 years, and had witnessed the gradual transformation of the HOA from a community organization to what she described as a small kingdom with Douglas as its king. They fined the Hendersons $100 per day for planting unauthorized rose bushes until they could not afford to stay, she explained, her hands trembling slightly. The Johnsons' request to paint their door navy blue instead of the approved forest green resulted in a lawsuit that bankrupted them. We do not talk about the board because the walls have ears. People who complain find themselves with violation notices the next day. Over the next week, I spoke with more residents, always carefully, always discreetly. Most were too frightened to say much, but I pieced together a disturbing picture. The HOA had evolved into a mechanism for controlling property and expanding territorial reach. Several residents mentioned neighboring properties that had been targeted, blockaded, or otherwise pressured until the owners sold at discounted prices. One afternoon, while having coffee at a local diner, I spotted Douglas Wilkins himself on the golf course adjacent to the restaurant. He was shaking hands and laughing with a man I recognized as County Commissioner Thomas Reed, the very official whose office would be responsible for addressing illegal road blockages. The connection became clear. The HOA's systematic expansion had been facilitated by strategic relationships with county officials who looked the other way when regulations were bent or broken. The train car blockade was not just an isolated act of harassment. It was part of a years-long pattern of territorial acquisition. As I paid my bill, the waitress slid a note across the counter with my receipt. It contained a phone number and the words, "Former owner of the Simpson property. Call me." When I did, I met James Simpson, who told me how his family had sold their 5 acres adjacent to the HOA 3 years ago after mysterious vandalism, cut utility lines, and eventual road access problems made their property unusable. They blocked our driveway with construction equipment that never moved, James explained. When we complained, county inspectors found problems with our septic system that had passed inspection the year before. They wore us down until selling was the only option. Looking across the rolling hills toward my blocked property, I made a decision. Unlike previous owners, I would not be intimidated into selling. This was not just about my land anymore. This was about standing up to systematic abuse of power that had gone unchallenged for far too long. The most important weapon against this type of situation is documentation and legal expertise, said Catherine Reynolds, folding her hands on her polished oak desk. With silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and piercing blue eyes behind rectangular glasses, she radiated competence and authority. After interviewing 3 attorneys, I knew she was the right choice. Her 25-year specialization in property disputes and reputation for taking on powerful local interests made her perfect for my case. Her office walls displayed framed newspaper articles about various David versus Goliath property cases she had won. "Tell me everything from the beginning," she instructed, legal pad ready. For the next hour, I detailed my encounters with the HOA, the train car blockade, and the patterns of intimidation I had uncovered. Catherine asked sharp, specific questions about property boundaries, recorded easements, and the timeline of events. "What these people are doing is almost certainly illegal on multiple fronts," she concluded. "But winning against established local powers requires more than being right. It requires being meticulously prepared with irrefutable evidence. We need to build a case so solid they cannot wriggle out of it." She recommended starting with a complete historical property survey to establish exact boundaries and easements. "Trust no existing markers or descriptions," she warned. "We need our own independent assessment." The professional survey team arrived 3 days later, accessing my property through a difficult back route since the main access remained blocked. Their findings were revelatory. The train car had been placed not just on my access road, but partially on county right-of-way land. Additionally, the survey revealed that the HOA had installed landscaping, drainage systems, and even part of their perimeter fence on land that legally belonged to either me or the county. With this information, Catherine helped me file official complaints about the illegal blockade with the County Transportation Department, Environmental Protection Office, and Property Zoning Board. The responses were predictably bureaucratic promises to investigate with no timeframe specified. Meanwhile, Catherine directed me to request all historical records related to the formation and expansion of the Lakeside Hills HOA. The county clerk's office initially claimed these records would take 6 to 8 weeks to locate. Catherine responded with a formal legal records request that miraculously produced the documents within 3 days. My dining room transformed into an investigation headquarters. Every evening after work, I spread documents across the table, constructing a timeline of the HOA's formation and expansion. The pattern of aggressive acquisition became even clearer. What began as a legitimate community association had morphed into a mechanism for controlling and acquiring adjacent properties. Late one night, as I cross-referenced the HOA's original formation documents with county charter requirements, I noticed something odd. The founding charter for Lakeside Hills required 3 authorized signatures: the developer, a county representative, and a banking institution representative to verify financial viability. The copy in my possession showed only 2 signatures. The bank representative's signature line remained blank, with no notarization on that section of the document. I called Catherine immediately despite the late hour. This could be extremely significant, she confirmed after I described my finding. Most HOA regulatory power stems from their properly chartered establishment. Without complete authorization, they might have been operating without legitimate authority from the very beginning. The next morning, we verified that the official copy on file with the county also lacked the required 3rd signature. Catherine could barely contain her excitement. "This is not just a technicality," she explained. Under County Code Section 47.3, proper formation requires all 3 signatures before an HOA can exercise any regulatory authority. Without that bank representative signature, their entire legal foundation is compromised. As we built our case, certified letters from the HOA began arriving at my temporary apartment. The first demanded I remove unauthorized survey markers from HOA common areas. The second alleged environmental violations for the survey team's access route. The third was more direct, an offer to purchase my problematic property at approximately 40% of its appraised value, with thinly veiled threats about mounting legal expenses if I refused. Catherine advised documenting everything but not responding directly. "They are trying to bait you into making statements they can use against you," she explained. "Let them think their intimidation is working while we build our case." Through public records requests, we uncovered the history of the train car itself. It had been purchased at auction by an LLC with direct ties to Douglas Wilkins and transported without proper permits. The environmental impact assessment that should have been required for placing such a large metal structure near a watershed area had never been conducted. One evening, while organizing documents, I discovered something that made the entire situation even more personal. Cross-referencing names of previous property owners pressured by the HOA, I found a familiar one: Anderson. My grandfather's old friend Thomas Anderson had owned property adjacent to mine that had been absorbed into the HOA development 10 years ago. A call to my father confirmed it. Thomas had sold under duress after fighting the HOA for years, eventually giving up when his wife became ill and the stress became too much. This revelation further strengthened my resolve. This was not just about my property rights anymore. It was about justice for all the people who had been bullied and manipulated by an organization that had been operating without legitimate authority for over 2 decades. Catherine and I worked methodically, gathering evidence of the HOA's numerous violations, improper boundary expansions, unpermitted construction, environmental negligence, and most importantly, the fundamental flaw in their authority to operate at all. The single missing signature on their charter had gone unnoticed for 23 years, while they had wielded illegitimate power over countless homeowners and adjacent property owners. As we compiled our evidence into a comprehensive legal brief, the HOA's letters became increasingly aggressive. Their final offer arrived by courier, a contract to purchase my property at 30% of market value, with a 48-hour deadline for response. The accompanying letter stated that refusal would result in all available legal remedies being pursued against me. "They know we are onto something," Catherine observed, reviewing the threatening letter. "They are getting desperate." What neither Douglas Wilkins nor his HOA realized was that their decades of unchecked authority were about to face their greatest challenge, all because of one missing signature that had been hiding in plain sight for 23 years. The back corner of Riverside Coffee Shop became our unofficial meeting place. With its ambient noise and private booths, it provided perfect cover for conversations that needed to remain confidential. Eleanor Davis was the first to join our growing resistance, bringing with her a detailed notebook documenting 7 years of what she described as HOA abuses. "I started keeping records after they forced the Richardsons out," she explained, her weathered hands turning pages filled with neat handwriting. "Tom Richardson questioned a special assessment at a meeting. 2 weeks later, they found 23 violations on his property. The fines bankrupted him within 6 months. Eleanor introduced me to other dissatisfied residents, the Patels, whose request to install solar panels had been denied despite state laws supporting renewable energy, the Johnsons, whose college fund for their daughter had been depleted by legal fees fighting arbitrary HOA rulings, and Michael Chen, a retired architect who had compiled evidence of the HOA selectively enforcing rules based on personal relationships with board members. "They cited me for my bird feeder being 4 inches too tall," Michael explained, showing photographs. "Meanwhile, board member Wilson has a gazebo that violates 3 different height restrictions, but no one says anything." Through Eleanor, we connected with former residents who had been forced out by the HOA's tactics. James Simpson brought 4 other families to a Saturday meeting at Catherine's office. Each shared similar stories of obstruction, harassment, and eventual financial pressure that made selling their properties the only viable option. "They salted my agricultural land," former farmer George Wilson stated flatly. "Soil samples proved it after my crops failed 2 years running. Could not prove who did it, but it started right after I refused their first purchase offer." While Catherine worked on our legal strategy, I focused on building community support and gathering documentation. I created a secure online document repository where residents could safely upload evidence of HOA overreach. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, we had accumulated over 200 incidents of selective enforcement, arbitrary rulings, and procedural violations. Contractors who had worked in the area provided another crucial perspective. Mason Bradley, who had been hired to repair my access road before the train car blockade, described being approached by HOA representatives who warned him against working on my property. They implied my company would lose all contracts within Lakeside Hills if I helped you, Mason explained. With 30% of my business coming from that neighborhood, I could not afford to be blacklisted. I am sorry I backed out, but they had me over a barrel. 3 other contractors provided similar accounts, signing affidavits describing HOA intimidation tactics. A local environmental engineer agreed to assess the impact of the train car placement, documenting oil leakage that was contaminating the soil and threatening the nearby creek, a clear violation of state environmental regulations that county officials had conspicuously ignored. As our coalition grew stronger, Catherine advised expanding our approach. We need somebody inside county government who is willing to acknowledge the problems, she explained. After several discreet inquiries, we identified Deputy Commissioner Rachel Martinez, who had recently voted against a zoning variance that would have benefited a development linked to Douglas Wilkins. Arranging a meeting with Rachel required careful planning to avoid detection. We met at a restaurant 30 miles outside the county, where she reviewed our evidence with increasing concern. I have suspected improper relationships between certain officials and the Lakeside Hills leadership, she admitted. But this goes beyond anything I imagined. The missing signature on the founding charter is especially significant. That calls into question the legal validity of everything they have done since formation. Rachel could not officially support our case while investigations were pending, but she provided crucial guidance on filing procedures and which departments would be most receptive to our complaints. More importantly, she promised to ensure our evidence received proper consideration rather than being buried in administrative limbo. Meanwhile, my dining room had evolved into a full command center. Maps covered the walls, with colored pins marking properties that had been improperly acquired. Timelines detailed the history of HOA expansion alongside the county officials in power during each acquisition. Financial records showed curious patterns of property value assessments that always seemed to favor HOA interests. The environmental report proved particularly damaging. Not only was the train car leaking contaminants, but its placement had altered natural drainage patterns, potentially violating federal wetland protection statutes. Catherine filed emergency motions with both state and federal environmental protection agencies, creating pressure from authorities beyond county influence. Throughout this process, I maintained careful documentation of my own experiences. The train car remained in place, forcing me to access my property through an arduous back route that added 40 minutes to each visit. Construction on my home remained on hold, with contractors unwilling to risk HOA retaliation. Each delay and difficulty was photographed, recorded, and added to our growing body of evidence. Catherine worked long hours preparing our legal challenge, focusing primarily on the fatally flawed HOA charter. There is established precedent that an improperly formed HOA cannot exercise authority, she explained. Everything stems from that original document, their architectural controls, their property acquisitions, their fines and assessments. If we can invalidate their foundation, the entire structure collapses. By the time we finished gathering evidence, we had assembled a comprehensive case documenting not just my personal situation, but a 23-year pattern of questionable practices built upon an improperly established authority. Our coalition had grown to include current residents, former property owners, contractors, environmental experts, and even a sympathetic county official. The HOA had built its power through isolation and intimidation, ensuring each victim felt alone in their struggle. Now, for the first time, their targets had united, transforming individual grievances into a formidable collective challenge. With our preparation complete, Catherine filed the official legal challenge with the county and requested an emergency hearing on the validity of the Lakeside Hills HOA charter. The next phase would bring our battle into the open. We were done investigating. The time had come for confrontation. The monthly Lakeside Hills HOA meeting was typically a sparsely attended affair. Board members would quickly approve minutes, conduct business with minimal discussion, and adjourn within 30 minutes. Residents had long ago stopped participating in a process they viewed as predetermined theater rather than actual governance. This meeting would be different. Catherine and I arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by 17 current and former residents who had joined our coalition. We took seats throughout the room rather than clustering together, creating a strategic presence that would be difficult to ignore or dismiss. I noticed Douglas Wilkins conferring urgently with board members as more people continued to arrive, filling the community center to capacity for the first time in years. Precisely at 7:00 p.m., Douglas called the meeting to order, his usual confident smile replaced by a tighter, more controlled expression. He moved quickly through agenda formalities before reaching the public comment period, which was typically bypassed due to lack of participation. "We have time for 2 brief comments from community members," he announced, clearly hopping to limit discussion. "Please keep remarks under 2 minutes." Catherine raised her hand first. "My name is Catherine Reynolds, attorney representing Robert Anderson regarding his property adjacent to Lakeside Hills. I would like to address the board concerning the illegal blockade of his access road and other violations of county regulations." Douglas frowned. "This meeting is for residents only. If you have concerns about external matters, you should schedule a separate meeting with the Architectural Review Committee." "I believe your bylaws permit property owners affected by HOA actions to speak at public meetings," Catherine countered, holding up a printed copy of their own regulations. "Additionally, I have numerous Lakeside Hills residents present who have ceded their speaking time to me." Murmurs spread through the room as residents nodded in confirmation. Douglas glanced at the HOA attorney, who reluctantly nodded. "You have 5 minutes," Douglas stated flatly. Catherine placed her laptop on the podium and connected it to the room's projector. "I will be brief but comprehensive," she began, her voice carrying clear authority. "For the past 3 months, the Lakeside Hills HOA has engaged in an illegal blockade of my client's property by placing a decommissioned train car across his only access road. This action violates county transportation regulations, environmental protection statutes, and basic property rights." The first slide appeared, showing aerial photographs of my property with the train car clearly blocking the access road. This blockade was implemented without permits, environmental impact studies, or legal authority, as the road in question lies partially on county right-of-way property. Douglas interrupted. "That road crosses HOA common areas and we have documentation." Catherine clicked to the next slide, showing the recent property survey with boundaries clearly marked. "These are the legally recorded property lines, confirmed by independent survey. As you can see, the HOA has incorrectly represented its boundaries in multiple areas, including this access road." For the next 4 minutes, Catherine methodically presented evidence of boundary misrepresentations, unpermitted structures, and environmental violations. With each slide, the room grew more tense. Residents who had suffered similar treatment began to nod in recognition, while board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But these issues, serious as they are, stem from a more fundamental problem, Catherine continued, arriving at her key point. She displayed the founding charter document on the screen, with the missing third signature highlighted. According to County Code Section 47.3, homeowners associations must be properly chartered with three required signatures: developer, county representative, and financial institution. As clearly visible here, the Lakeside Hills Charter lacks the required banking signature and proper notarization. The HOA attorney stood abruptly. This is procedural minutia from decades ago. The county has recognized our authority for years. Administrative recognition does not overcome legal requirements, Catherine countered. The missing signature is not a technicality. It is a fundamental flaw in the legal establishment of this HOA. Without proper formation, this association has been operating without legal authority for 23 years. The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Douglas pounded his gavel repeatedly. Order! This meeting will maintain order. When the noise subsided, his face had flushed deep red. These allegations are baseless and potentially defamatory. This meeting is not the proper forum for legal disputes. An elderly resident stood despite the chairman's objections. Is it true? Has our HOA been collecting fees and fines without proper authority all these years? Before Douglas could respond, other residents joined in with questions. The carefully controlled meeting had transformed into open rebellion. Board member Susan Chen, looking troubled, turned to Douglas. Should we consult with legal counsel before continuing? If there are questions about our charter, we should address them properly. There is nothing to address, Douglas snapped. This meeting is adjourned. The board will convene in executive session immediately. As residents protested the abrupt ending, Douglas and most board members quickly exited through a side door. Only Susan Chen remained, gathering her papers slowly while watching the room's reaction. When Catherine approached her, Susan discreetly passed her a business card. "Call me tomorrow," she whispered. "There are things about the charter situation you should know." Outside in the parking lot, residents gathered in small groups, discussing the revelations with animation rarely seen in the controlled community. Catherine and I were speaking with a leaner when Douglas approached, his board members flanking him like bodyguards. "You have made a serious miscalculation," he said, pointing his finger at my face. "This HOA has relationships with every significant builder, lender, and official in this county. Your little property will remain blocked until it rots. No one will help you build there, connect utilities, or approve permits. You have no idea who you are dealing with." I met his gaze steadily. "Neither do you." Catherine stepped forward, extending an envelope. "This is formal notice of legal action filed this morning with the county challenging the legitimacy of the Lakeside Hills Homeowners Association. A hearing has been scheduled for next month. In the meantime, we have also filed emergency motions regarding the illegal road blockade and environmental violations, with copies sent to state and federal agencies beyond local jurisdiction." Douglas refused to take the envelope, so Catherine placed it on the hood of his luxury SUV. "Consider yourself officially served," she stated calmly. As they walked away, board member Richard Taylor muttered something about making me regret this action, but Douglas silenced him with a sharp gesture. They climbed into their vehicles and departed, leaving us standing in the parking lot with dozens of residents who had witnessed the confrontation. An older man approached me, extending his hand. "My name is Robert Jenkins. I have lived here 15 years and watched them bully good people out of their homes and property. Whatever happens next, know that many of us stand with you. It is about time someone stood up to them. One by one, other residents came forward with similar sentiments. The confrontation had transformed abstract legal issues into visible human conflict. Lines had been drawn, and the community had begun to choose sides. The HOA's power had always depended on isolation and intimidation. By bringing the conflict into the open, we had changed the dynamic fundamentally. The battle now moved to the legal arena, where evidence and procedure would matter more than connections and intimidation. As Catherine reminded me while we drove away, they have operated unchallenged for so long they believe they are untouchable. That belief may prove to be their greatest vulnerability. The county administrative building normally housed routine bureaucratic proceedings, building permit approvals, variance requests, tax assessment appeals. Today was different. By 8:30 a.m., the largest hearing room was filled to capacity, with dozens more people lining the hallway outside. News of our challenge to the Lakeside Hills HOA had spread throughout the community, drawing current residents, former property owners, local attorneys, and even reporters from the regional newspaper. Catherine and I sat at the petitioner's table with our evidence organized in carefully labeled binders. Behind us sat our coalition of supporters. Across the room, the HOA delegation projected confidence with their polished appearance. Douglas Wilkins in an expensive suit, flanked by 3 attorneys from Preston, Hargrove, and Wells, the most prestigious law firm in the county. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the 5-member county review board entered and took their seats at the elevated dais. Commissioner Thomas Reed, Douglas's golf partner, had recused himself due to potential conflict of interest, a small victory resulting from our careful documentation of their relationship. Deputy Commissioner Rachel Martinez sat in his place, her expression professionally neutral despite her private support for our case. The chairman called the hearing to order, explaining the procedures and time limits. This is an administrative review regarding the charter status of Lakeside Hills Homeowners Association and related complaints concerning property boundaries and access restrictions. Each side will have 30 minutes for initial presentation, followed by questions from the board. The HOA attorneys presented first, projecting an image of institutional legitimacy. Their lead counsel, Harrison Preston, spoke with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to deference from local officials. For 23 years, Lakeside Hills has been a model community, enhancing property values and setting standards for excellence throughout the county, Preston began. This frivolous challenge is nothing more than an attempt by a disgruntled adjacent property owner to avoid reasonable community standards. He dismissed the missing signature as an administrative oversight that had been functionally remedied through years of county recognition. Regarding my blocked access road, he presented altered maps claiming the road crossed HOA property, contradicting our survey evidence. The association has always acted within its authority to protect community interests, Preston concluded. We ask the board to affirm the HOA's legitimate standing and dismiss these unfounded complaints. When Catherine rose to present our case, the contrast in approach was immediate. Rather than broad claims and appeals to tradition, she methodically presented specific evidence, beginning with the county code governing HOA formation. Section 47.3 explicitly requires 3 signatures for valid charter establishment, she stated, displaying the relevant statute. This requirement exists to ensure proper oversight and financial viability. It is not optional or subject to later ratification. She then presented the original charter document with its missing 3rd signature, followed by legal precedents from other counties, where improperly formed HOAs had been invalidated. With precise clarity, she explained how every subsequent action by an improperly formed association lacked legal foundation. Regarding the train car blockade, Catherine presented our professional survey showing the road's location relative to property boundaries, followed by testimony from the county's own transportation department confirming no permits had been issued for the obstruction. Environmental experts documented contamination from the train car leaking into protected watershed areas. Most damaging was testimony from Susan Chen, the HOA board member who had approached us after the confrontation. Having served as board secretary for 5 years, she testified that concerns about the charter's validity had been raised previously but deliberately suppressed by Douglas and other senior board members. "We were instructed never to discuss the signature issue," Susan stated, her voice steady despite obvious tension. "When I suggested properly filing an amended charter, I was removed from the executive committee." As questions began from the review board, the distinct approaches became even clearer. The HOA attorneys responded with legal technicalities and procedural arguments. Catherine answered with specific references to statute, precedent, and documented evidence. The pivotal moment came when our evidence specialist placed the founding documents under the document camera, allowing magnified examination of the incomplete notarization. "The required third signature was never obtained," she explained, pointing to empty lines and incomplete notarizations. Per County Code Section 47.3, this renders the entire association formation invalid from inception. All subsequent actions taken under this invalid authority are likewise void. The hearing room fell silent as board members examined the document closely. Douglas whispered urgently to his attorneys, whose expressions grew increasingly concerned. After hours of testimony, evidence presentation, and questioning, the board adjourned to deliberate. The tension in the waiting area was palpable. Douglas and his attorneys huddled in,